Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Lords of Limited. My name is Ben Warney, and joining me on the line, as always, Mr. Ethan Fires of Invention, Yoria and Sax. This is a beautiful marriage of some of our favorite cards here. The new Pioneer decks just keep flowing, my friend.
They keep flowing. Look, we've got to try out all the hotness, Yeah, so this is a sort of a stock deck is Enigmatic Incarnation and Fires of Invention. So Enigmatic Incarnation is 2 green blue enchantment, and at the beginning of your end step, you can sacrifice an enchantment, basically pod an enchantment into a creature. So you sack a 4 mana enchantment, get a 5 mana creature, whatever. That's like a pretty, sometimes there are like Karuga Fires decks, Yorion Fires, whatever. So I'm messing around with that. We'll see. I don't know. But I did when I was like, oh, I'll try this deck out. I was like, oh, that'd be pretty cool to play that as a sort of homage to Ben's love for Fires of Invention and my love for Yorion. But we'll see. And I do appreciate it. I thought you were going to start by flaming me on the podcast for making us record on a Saturday because I want to play in a Pioneer tournament on Sunday.
I mean, I was not thrilled about it prior to recording, but I mean, we got to do what we got to do, The show must go on, and you got to play some Magic. Listen, if you didn't play in this tournament on Sunday and you 0-4 dropped from the PT after scrubbing out of your draft, I would feel terrible. I mean, we have to assume your Pioneer record is going to carry you at this point, right? You're basically a constructed Magic player.
Well, except for a while I was feeling, because I wasn't in love with Lost Caverns of Ixalan, as I think we'll talk about a little later today. I didn't much care for cons, and part of me has been bitten by the stakes bug that when I'm not playing the Arena Open or the championship qualifiers, I'm like, well, I kind of want to prep for the Pro Tour,
right?
But now, as we were talking about just before we started recording, I've been bitten by the Vintage Cube bug pretty hard.
So hard. It's so good.
And Kaladesh Remastered is on Arena right now, which is also really fun. I recorded a video for our YouTube channel this week. I love that format. And I'm also playing some Explorer stuff because that's the Arena Championship 5 format. And that's this month's qualifier weekend format. So I'm trying to figure that out, it's basically Pioneer missing a few cards, but there's a lot of Magic right now that I want to play. And my stupid son keeps getting in the way.
Wow. How dare he?
I love you, Jonah. Never mind. Well, so you're all Vintage Cube all the time right now, yeah?
All Vintage Cube all the time, but my brothers, so all my brothers are doctors, right? So they're 2 of them are hospitalists and one's a cardiologist, and their schedules are week on, week off, week on, week off. So when I'm at school's back in session now, # rest in peace, winter break, I can get on Discord and see that my brothers are in a group chat playing Magic all day. While I'm at school, every time I pop open Discord, during passing period or something, it's brutal. They've been jamming some Kaladesh Remastered.
Do they make sure their weeks are synced up, or did it just so happen?
It just so happens, usually 2 of the 3 of them at least are synced up. But
wow,
new development is them plopping themselves in Discord and just playing Magic to taunt me.
That's amazing. Yeah, I'm sure it's just to taunt you, and it's not because it's super, super fun. I played in a 64-person Vintage Cube last night.
Ooh, the stakes!
The stakes
and the Vintage Cube bug.
Well, and it's classic, Ethan, when I haven't really played poker much anymore because I can't stay
That's
up.
What I was going to say. You're also double queuing poker for sure, right?
No, I'm not. But I used to join a tournament at 8 o'clock or whatever and be like, oh, I hope I bust out before 10 o'clock because I got to go to bed. And that's how I felt. I 306'd my first draft.
Punished I was like, for doing well.
Oh, no. And then I drafted a really good, I'm going to say it was Luris deck, but it was really good. It was lands that had Dark Depths, Thespian Stage, plus Demonic Tutor to search for the combo, Vampire Hexmage as another combo piece, Crop Rotation to search for the combo. And round 1, I played against Mono Blue Oops All Bounce. I was looking at Snap and Odawara and Brazen Borrower. And I was like, I cannot make a Merit Lage token because it just is going to get wrecked. So I lost in round 1 of the top 8 draft, but it's pretty fun. What's your Vintage Cube life like these days?
My Vintage Cube life has just been a renaissance. Mostly I've been drafting some, but I've been watching LSV's videos on his YouTube channel. You and I were chatting about that before the show, just back to the old days, when I was in college, falling asleep to an LSV YouTube video. It's been great.
Yeah.
But yeah, I've been drafting. I Some of my pet decks aren't really there anymore. Like black white, like attrition, disruption doesn't seem like it's really much of a thing anymore. But I've been loving the blue combo decks. Been loving the lands packages. I like how juiced the lands decks have gotten. And
Mm-hmm.
domain honestly kind of seems like a thing. Like domain stompy. Like I've gotten got several
Really?
times, yeah, by like territorial kavu and just other things beaten down with some of the tri lands.
Interesting. I haven't seen that yet. I did get wrecked by a Valakut Dryad of the Elysian Grove combo that so Dryad of the
Oh
Elysian
yeah, yeah,
Grove
yeah, yeah,
turns
yeah.
all your lands into every basic land type, and then Valakut is like deal lightning bolt stuff once you have 6 mountains in play. And I just was like, oh, this is a real thing. And I drafted that. And that's pretty cool. Yeah, the Vintage Cube, I think for a while, you and I both were like, Vintage Cube isn't that different. But Daybreak Games, the company that is like taking over Magic Online, they've done a great job with like overhauling, retooling the Vintage Cube a bunch. And, I know some people aren't a huge fan of the changes this time around, but I think, as I often feel like with anything, with any game design, take those risks, make those changes, and then learn from them. And I think that's what they're doing. And I'm really enjoying the Vintage Cube.
Is that true? I haven't felt any of that, Scuttle, about not liking the changes.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I'm a huge fan that Kiki combo is not in the cube this time around, but I think some people don't like that. I think there are a handful of like pretty questionable clunkers like Weather Seed Treaty, talk about domain being a thing, but like Weather Seed Treaty is way too slow for Vintage
Yes.
Cube.
Yeah, for sure. I think on my bucket list is Doomsday Thassa's Oracle. I have not gotten to do that yet,
Yeah,
and I really want to do that. That feels like it kind of replaced Splinter Twin in some senses.
but it's so much harder to assemble, I feel like.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's all he has to say. Yeah. All right, Ben. So you came to me with this great title, and that's what so all I needed to see was the title. And I was like, I'm sold. Whatever you want to do with this episode, let's do it. So, I think we got a lot of great feedback on our best and worst episode last week. So thanks for folks about that. Love to see everyone chiming in with their opinions about, what their rankings were, etc. But I think a lot of people felt, or I'd say a vocal majority felt that we maybe gave up on Lost Caverns a little too early.
Guilty.
Guilty. And that we maybe didn't give it a fair shot, whatever. And I think part of that's certainly true. Part of it is also just like what's beautiful about this game and the reason why we can podcast about it for 6 years plus, and the reason why we play it all day, every day in Discord and make our brothers jealous is because different things about it appeal to different people. And so just because Ben and I say that like we didn't like LCI, that doesn't mean we're wrong and someone else is right, or we're right and someone else is wrong, right? It's just like these are the things that didn't work for us. But I think part of what's going to be fun about this episode is getting to dive in about what our view of what didn't quite work, and then also take a little fun, I love a separate list life of take a fun look at a handful of cards to buff and a handful of cards to nerf in the sort of alchemizing sense that they haven't really done since, what was it, Alchemy Horizons Baldur's Gate or whatever. They changed a few cards, and we were really kind of blown away by how much a set can change by just a couple card tweaks, right? It was really came down to maybe 4 or 5 commons that got changed, and we're like, that's what matters, And so we're going to see if maybe we can get into that today.
Yeah, absolutely looking forward to it. It's shocking how much the top 10 commons or whatever drive what has to happen in a format.
Yeah. Well, and as I will talk about, I think a lot of that then stems from it may be a bit of a chicken and an egg situation, but I think the real egg is the mechanics, and we'll talk about that as well in terms of how it shapes the format. So before we get into all that good stuff, let's talk about the Patreon page. Patreon.com/Lords of Limited is where folks can go to give back to the show if they so choose. The show will always be free, but starting off a new year, turning over a new leaf, whatever, if you want to decide to start supporting your favorite Magic podcast or our show, whatever you deem worthy, you can head on over to patreon.com/Lords of Limited. And we have a lot of great perks over there for folks who want to do so. Get access to the Lords of Limited Discord, which is just a fantastic spot for like-minded limited individuals to get to chat with each other. You can get access to a number of other things. The show a day early. You can get access to our show notes, the show in written form, as you can see it. And you can also get access with monthly coaching sessions with me or Ben. So if any or all of that sounds of interest to you, that's where you want to head over to. And we want to shout out our new patrons the first week that they join. So this week we are welcoming Joel, Frankie, Mark, Doug, Illicit Lissid, Kashone, Luis, Felix, Jamie, Jared, and David. Thank you, thank you, thank you. We really appreciate your support.
Yeah, cannot say thank you enough. Show is also brought to you by Cool Stuff Inc., coolstuffinc.com, where they've got cool stuff in stock. And one of those cool things is the checkout code LOL, all caps, to get you 5% off anything that you order and let them know that we sent you over there. So make sure that you use that for whatever you're ordering. And as Ethan said, there's a lot of Magic to be played, a lot of things to be done. Honestly, the thing that I am kind of jonesing to do right now, about 5 or 10 years ago, probably 10 years ago at this point, my oldest brother and I put together a vintage cube that was like 700 some cards, like way too huge, and is just like woefully out of date. And LSV was talking in his videos, like he made his own cube and has been testing his own new cube. And I kind of want to like go through and update our cube, but there's so many new cool cards in the vintage cube that I don't have. Like I'm maybe thinking about doing some orders from coolstuffinc.com and putting together like tweaking the vintage cube and getting it all up to date. So whatever you're doing, whether it's, buying some singles for cube, maybe it's for a commander deck, maybe it's just getting another one of those draft boxes to store in the old closet to pick up some dust, please make sure you use checkout code LOL, all caps, to get 5% off your order and let them know that we sent you over there.
So, a really cool update in the community this week as well. There's a new website. It's been started by G Guards and Mike Provencher, who's a member of our Discord, as well as many other Magic Discords, called mtgscribe.com. There really isn't. Back in the day, when there was just one platform, maybe you could go to mtgo.com, go to the updates. Maybe the calendar of events was up to date. Maybe it wasn't. It was February. You couldn't see what was going on in March, whatever. Now we've got MTGO, Arena, paper stuff, secret layer drops, whatever, CubeCon drama maybe. If you want a spot for all of that good stuff in one place, that's what MTG Scribe is. It's a really great website. They're taking a lot of feedback right now, but it's a good spot to be able to check just like, hey, what events are happening this month? What are the updates from Arena? What are the updates from MTGO? What formats have been announced for future, Magic Cons or Pro Tours, whatever. mtgscribe.com. That's the place to go. I immediately put it in my browser, bookmarked it, because then I just don't need to worry about, like, I'm so sick of Googling MTG Arena calendar announcements, and I don't have to do that anymore because Mike's taking care of it. So if you're like me and you've been trying to struggle with that stuff, mtgscribe.com is for you.
Love it.
So where do we want to start with talking about Lost Caverns of Ixalan, where it maybe fell short, what sort of thoughts we have about why it didn't quite click for us?
I think personally, I would just like to get out into the world. I don't think it was that I gave up on the format. And someone in our Discord had said, Ben, it seems like Ben played this format for 3 weeks and then didn't touch it. And I didn't once Cons of Tarkir came out, which is like probably the first time ever in the history of our podcast that I have left a format as early as I did, just because there were other things I wanted to play more. It was Cons, and there was the Cons Arena open to prep for.
But as a podcaster, you have to keep up the ruse that you're still playing the format, that you're still an expert.
I don't think so, because I think that just doesn't hold water with the people that are actually playing. Like, it's obvious that you're not. I think when someone is actually diving in and doing 10 Lost Caverns of Ixalan drafts a week, and that hasn't been me for the past few weeks. And I think that's okay, but that person was saying, well, I think if Ben came back to it, he would like it better. And I'm certain that I would not. Like, that's where the difference is, I think, between some of the feedback we've gotten in the Discord. There's just too many fundamental issues that don't hit for me personally, and not that other people can't enjoy what I don't like about it, but there's just a lot of baked in variance and inequity, I think, among mechanics and colors as a result of inequity among the mechanics in Lost Caverns of Ixalan. And I think we're going to dive into some of that. So let's start by just taking a look at the mechanics, I think. So if you were to rank the mechanics, power rankings in order, most powerful to least powerful, what would that be off the top of your head? I'm kind of putting you on the spot here.
You're putting me on the spot. Can we go one at a time? Like, I'll say, I feel confident Discover is the most powerful.
I don't really necessarily think that one. I think it has the highest ceiling. But the way they did it, it's on like 3 cards where it's busted and then irrelevant on a lot of other cards.
Well, so that's a different question then, right? To say, like, what's the most powerful mechanic intrinsically versus what's the most powerful mechanic printed on the cards in the format.
Yeah, I think which of the mechanics pull the most weight in the format is how I want to pose the question. So I'll give you mine, and I'll stall for a little bit and give you some time to think. I think for me, craft is number one, tip top of how it influences the format or how it was printed on the cards. And then I would say explore slash map tokens. I think map tokens even more so than explore, but those kind of go hand in hand.
Mm-hmm.
And then I would say discover. It's certainly highest ceiling for discover, but also printed on a lot of cards where you just don't ever play those cards. And then I think Descend is bringing up the rear, but that's largely due to how they designed Descend and the Descend cards rather than it is a knock against some sort of a graveyard mechanic. Like it could have been different if the format were less aggressive. But basically, I don't know if you listened to Sirkovitz's episode on LR where he was talking about data, but like Descend decks essentially have to make it to like turn 10 or turn 11 before their win rate like starts
Hmm.
getting to what you would want for your win rate to be. And that's just such a tough ask in this format
So
because the
yeah.
majority of the cards do not incentivize you to do that.
Yeah, you really have to go against the grain of the entire set to make a Descend deck work. I also feel like part of what's baked into your question and why I'm kind of having a hard time answering it is the as fan of it, of like where things exist at common. Because I do think like I like Descend a lot, but it's basically at rare. Like you need the Tarmogoyf variant, you need some stuff. You need the 4 mana 4/4 that has you surveil 2, and then if you have Descend 8, you whenever you draw a card, you drain 1. Like you need pieces like that. It's not the common like Brood Rage Mycoid or whatever, or Basking Chupacabra or whatever it is.
Well, it's not
Capybara.
that, but you need Chupacabra Echo. Like that's what you need
Yeah.
below rare, I think, to make Descend work. To really
Yeah.
feel good about going in on it.
So I think a better conversation, we can go in that order. We can talk about craft because it's interesting that you have crafted the ceiling, because I do think there are some craft cards, as we'll get to in our buffs and nerfs, that are perhaps a little skewed. But I didn't, maybe it was because of my approach. I went into the format thinking that craft, it was going to be all about craft. It kind of reminds me of how I felt about the modal double faced cards in Zendikar Rising. Went on a real journey with that, starting with I'm going to jam 7 or 8 of these in a deck with 12 lands. And then that just not really working out. And the format really shaking out to be much more about finding your color pair and then getting 2 to 3 MDFCs in that mix once you knew what deck you were trying to be in, rather than just like snap up all the MDFCs and make a brew around those. And I think I treated craft similarly as that early on, of like, well, these cards are all incredible, but you get to this sort of choke point or diminishing returns with craft because they all need the same resources, you know? And so then it's about like figuring out which of the craft cards really matter, which of the craft cards stand on their own face up, which of the craft cards are you're really incentivized to want to flip, which of the ones you can take or leave flipping. Like I think that's a lot more about what craft is. And so I don't know if across the board, I feel like it's that powerful, because a part of me feels like, Tithing Blade is a great example, a card that we were super high on. And then once I realized that Tithing Blade was not about flipping it at all, it was just like, do you want the edict? Do you want the rectangle after you've edicted? Then you'll like this card. It's not about flipping. You never had time to flip that card for a meaningful way to impact the game.
But that's what's going to be so interesting about talking about the alchemy changes we're thinking about making to the cards, because I do think it all starts with the mechanics, right?
Yes.
So I would say that one of the knocks against craft for the format for me is that the good craft cards, and I agree, not all craft cards are created equal, but the good craft cards let the best decks, the Jeskai colored decks, win the early game and win the late game, which is just not fair, right? Because if craft weren't as good as it were on some of the cards, then Descend would have a reason to try to win the late game. You know what I mean? But you can just play blue white or you can just play blue red and also still have almost as good a late game as the decks that are only trying to play for the late game. You know what I mean?
Right. Can you throw out a few cards as examples? I mean, obviously, like Master's Guide Mural is one,
Master's Guide Mural, clay fried bricks, like is just clay fired bricks. I've called it fried bricks for way too long.
but neither of those cards win the early game. They only win the late
But they
game.
go in a deck that is already so good at the early game that it doesn't matter. And then they also get to play this super powerful late game card just essentially for free. Like the
Yeah.
blue white decks are so good at every single stage of the game because blue's cards are so versatile.
Yeah, I think it's more about, I think blue is just very powerful in the format. And as we talked about, I think white has some shortcomings. It does sort of end up in that sort of split. There's like a bifurcated thing about white of like some cards are really good at being aggressive, some cards are really good at being defensive, Cosmian Blast, the Saw Blades, whatever, things like that. But I agree with you. Blue is juiced.
So if we move on to explore as a mechanic, I think one of the fundamental problems in the format for me with explore just being a powerful mechanic, but also in this format, I think a high variance mechanic is that it's printed on so many evasive creatures. And
Yeah.
then like that's kind of weird because then you're really incentivized to want the +1/+1 counter. And if you miss and your opponent hits on a +1/+1 counter on their evasive creature and you miss on yours, then all of a sudden they are winning the board presence race, which is more important than hitting your land drops up to, land 5, 6, 7 sometimes. It's very weird to me how much hitting the +1/+1 counter matters on a lot of the good cards that either explore or make map tokens.
Yeah, I was thinking about, and looks like it'll be coming back to Arena. I don't know if it's this week or next week, but Rivals of Ixalan drafts, which is Rivals, and then OG Ixalan as the draft format, will be coming back to Arena. And I was trying to think back to Explore in that set, and a lot of the cards were understated. In that set we had, I think it was called Seeker Squire, which was 1 and a black for a 1/2 ETB Explorer. And we have that at common in River Herald Scout in this format. And that card's not good. Like, that's just not, because what you want from that card, it's not aggressive, right? Because sometimes it's a 2 mana 1/2. And it's not good defensively because sometimes it's a 2 mana 1/2, right? What you want is, if you're looking for a good blocker, you want the 2 mana 3/3 defender, basically, in blue. And I was trying to think about, well, why was Seeker Squire? I mean, obviously it's been 6 years, so just power creep is a thing. But also, a lot of the cards with Explore in that format were understated, right? There were like lots of, there was a 2 mana 0/3 that could become a 1/4, or there was a 4 mana 2/2 Menace, or 4 mana 2/2 Haste with Explore. So like they were woefully understated if they hit a land. And then even if they hit a spell, like you were wanting to hit a land, because even in that format, because even if they hit a spell, they were still bad. You're like, well, now I'm still playing a 4 mana 3/3 that didn't draw me a card. So I'd rather play a 4 mana 2/2 that did draw me a card. And I wonder if that is part of the issue here, is that like they're just kind of well statted. Like you've got whatever, you got a 4 mana 4/3 that's going to draw you a land, or it's a 4 mana 5/4, which just ends up being huge.
Better than a 4/3 draw you a land because the games are so compressed too. And I think one of the things we wanted to do with this episode was just talk about intrinsic power level also, right? Or
Right.
how power works. And River
Thank you
Herald
for
Scout.
thank you for grounding the episode and not just Ethan and Ben complain for an hour.
Yeah, but I don't think it will be that. Hopefully people haven't tuned out already.
Yeah.
But I think River Herald Scout is such a good example because that's a great Magic the Gathering card, right?
Right.
Like a 1 and a blue,
Yeah.
1/2, draw you a land. Great. Sign me up. You're playing that 10 out of 10 times in most formats,
Yeah.
except Lost Caverns of Ixalan. And a 2 mana 2/3 is also,
2 mana 2/3 Surveil one is great.
yes, should be very good as well. Like that's akin to, like some of the top commons we've seen, like Scrapwork Mutt or
Yeah.
the stupid thing from the Broker's deck. What was that called? Rafine's Informant.
Yeah.
The 2/1 that rummaged. Like it's in that ilk of cards, but yet somehow in Lost Caverns of Ixalan, you're hoping to not put River Herald Scout in your deck unless you're blue green and explore, and you're hoping to not be blue green explore.
Yeah.
Which
Right.
is such a weird thing. And if we were to try to alchemize River Herald Scout, like I don't think you can do it to make it good.
Like, what are you going to do?
The,
Make it a 2 mana 2/2?
right? Like given the context of the other cards around it,
Yeah.
it's very hard to change it because it's already so strong. But the issue is there's already explore or map tokens stapled onto flyers, like a 2/2 flyer or a 1/1 flyer. They're just like way better and way more efficient than River Herald Scout.
Well, and in some, map tokens you can think of as a downside. You have to invest mana into them. You have to have a creature in play, right? Like you can get blown out with, because you're targeting. Whereas when a creature comes into play and has explore, you just do it. But honestly, most of the time it's all upside because you
Okay, I was
get
gonna
to
say that's what I was about to like. I didn't know where we were going there.
most of the time it's all upside because you get to put it wherever you want, right? Like, sure, so you get to play Waterwind Scout, get the map token, maybe you get to put it on Scout and it becomes a 3/3 flyer or it draws you land. But then later in the game, you get to get your 2/2 flyer, and then maybe you immediately get to explore onto something else. And you get the counter and you enable an attack that you didn't have previously. Like the map tokens are generally more versatile and more powerful for limited than just straight up explore.
Well, and because they overlap with all the artifacts matter stuff and, can craft, like they're just
Yeah.
so strong. So you'd almost rather River Herald Scout. River Herald Scout would be better if it were one and a blue, 1/2 make a map token. Like that would be closer to getting it playable, but I still don't think it quite gets there.
That's really interesting. I hadn't thought about that, but yeah, I think that's true. So it sounds like you think part of the issue is about it being tacked onto evasive threats. Because
That is
I don't remember that being the thing from OG Ixalan or Rivals, that like it didn't really feel like that was where it was attached to. Like it had, there were some menace creatures or whatever, but I don't feel like it was on so many flyers. I mean, Miner's Guidewing, it's not quite the map token thing, right? You can just fizzle with it, but more often than not, you're getting so much for just that single white mana.
Well, and there's also the aspect of variance too, right? Like people are going to be drafting Waterwind Scout highly. If you're playing in Mythic on Arena or whatever, playing against good competition, you're likely to be jamming Waterwind Scouts into each other. Like that's not an uncommon thing. And then when your opponent hits and you miss, like theirs is just so much better than yours, and that
Yeah,
was
but
all random chance.
like in turn, if we're, I feel like I want to push back on the variance argument because like you're also just as likely to outclass. Like it's all gonna work out in the wash, right?
That's
You're just as
fair in the
likely.
grand. I'm living in the moment,
I
baby.
know you. I know
I'm
you're
like
very
in
much
the
living in the
moment.
moment, but like, yeah, this argument doesn't quite do it for me.
That's fair. I appreciate that perspective.
Okay. So
Heard.
so we got craft and explore, and then discover, which we also already sort of touched on in the 50 takes episode, is this like the delta is just so huge. The reason why I said I thought discover was clearly the most powerful mechanic is because when it exists on like a 4 mana 3/2, it's just busted.
Yeah, it's either insane
Yeah.
or you're not very
Unplayable.
interested. I think the sweet spot is the lands. Like that
Well,
was a very nice sweet spot.
and I think, a shout out to Sam Black and these other sort of Descend, you know,
Pioneers,
thank you.
explorers,
This is Descend Explorers and
crusaders.
Pioneers. Yeah. The Frontiers people of Descend decks is what's it called? Walk with the Ancestors, the 4 and a green, return a permanent, discover 4. I think that was a pretty key piece to a lot of the like derpy graveyard decks. And so that feels like a sweet spot of a card that I was like, this looks like I was equating that to whatever, the 5 mana, 3 things can't block, discover 4. And it's part of just like one card is, or one color is not really interested in that variance and the other color is. But I think most of the time, yeah, you're like, if you tack it onto a real card, it's going to be incredible. If you tack it onto not a real card, it's going to be unplayable.
Yeah, I think that's generally true.
I actually think Descend was great. I think Descend is a great mechanic.
I agree, except it's in the wrong format. Like the other stuff around it is
Yeah.
just better. Like the balance of the mechanics is out of whack to me.
Well, and I think, this is a gripe. I do think the act of descending, not counting tokens, is very clunky. It's a huge intuition fail. Like having to explain that to people. I don't know if did you ever play this format at an LGS? Like having to explain that to people is like, it doesn't make it. You're just like, oh no, it doesn't count tokens. Like why? Tokens go to the graveyard. Just like, yeah, but not today. Like it's hard. It does not really, you feel like you're like, I have a grasp on the rules of Magic the Gathering. And someone's like, yes, but it's not the same here.
Yeah, I would agree with that. But I think you could also make Descend a little more competitive. I think just from like if we're talking about alchemizing things, I think if it were 3 and 6 instead of 4 and 8, like that would be almost more closer to the power level of craft or something else. Because then you can get a mill 2, hit twice, and then just have one thing go to the graveyard, and then it's turned on. Whereas you almost have to mill 2 twice to really get it turned on in any sort of reasonable timeline.
Yeah, that's interesting. I never felt like turning, I don't have memories of looking at my graveyard with the little 3 in the corner or whatever, looking at all my descend cards with 3 and being like, why can't I get to 4? I don't know if that's a product of when you were doing the descend thing, it was just easy to get to 4, or a product of descend 4. What, like when I'm thinking about the descend 4 payoffs, they didn't really matter. Like I was more just using my graveyard as a resource, as like another place to have value, rather than thinking about getting to that threshold of 4 or 8, if that makes sense.
That
Like
does make sense.
there were obviously a few key cards, like the 2 mana 8/8. Like you're trying to descend 8 for that thing, But other than a few of those exceptions, I didn't feel that.
Yeah, I do think Descend is great. I just think basically Descend took a lot of work or a lot of time. Like as we saw, like certainly that was my sense, was that Descend decks needed the game to go very long
Mm-hmm.
before you were interested in doing it. And then like hearing the data from Sierkiewicz on LR backed up my intuition. But craft takes no effort. Discover takes no effort. Explore takes no effort. There's 3 mechanics, no effort. And Descend takes work and a lot of deck building and are some of the, if we talk about power level disparity, some of the least intrinsically powerful cards in the set.
All right, I'm so excited. I love a separate list moment for us. And we have 2 lists of 10 cards here, to buff and to nerf in the format. And we have come separately with our own alchemized. So if Watsy, you're listening, if you'd like to hire us at R&D, we're available for consult here. Where would you like to start, good sir?
Let's start with the buffs.
All right, let's start with the buffs. First card to discuss is Bat Colony.
Bat Colony is 2 and a white for an enchantment. When it ETBs, you make a 1/1 black bat creature token with flying for each mana from a cave spent to cast it. And whenever a cave enters the battlefield under your control, you put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control.
I have a feeling we have the same change for this card, but I'm curious to hear what yours is.
Oh, I went very avant-garde with my changes.
Oh,
I doubt we have the same change.
Wait, did you go avant-garde with like all your changes?
No, but I went fairly avant-garde with this one for what I wanted to do, because we didn't really talk about caves as one of the mechanics, but I do think they fell flat in power level compared to the other things. I think could have been a better escape hatch than they were, and I think would have been were Bat Colony better. So here's my change to Bat Colony. I think it should be 2 and a black instead of 2 and a white. 2
So
and a black.
avant-garde, okay.
Make a bat for each mana from a cave spent to cast it. So similar on that part.
Uh-huh.
And then instead of the putting +1/+1 counters on it, sacrifice 2 caves to return Bat Colony to its owner's hand.
Interesting.
So that it's more powerful, kind of ties in with Descend. This was by far my craziest one. Maybe we shouldn't have started off with this one, but
No, I love it. So what I thought the obvious change was thinking about, Wingmate Chaplain or whatever that card was, the defender that made 1/1 flyers. We've had guild payoffs before that like not only care about how many of the things you have when you play it, but not punishing you for having caves after the fact. And I just felt like the +1/+1 counter thing didn't do it. So I said, whenever a cave ETBs, you make a bat.
ooh, I like that.
Yeah, like so that you could feel fine in a deck with 8 caves casting this for no bats. You'd be like, okay, but I'm gonna get bats eventually, and it's powerful, but not like crazy out of hand. You're only getting 1 per turn with your land drops usually, so yeah, I think you could have fixed this. Why did you want to change it? Would you change it to black because of Descend?
Because of Descend, and I felt like white was the color the caves decks were by far the least interested in. And then like you were stretching your mana to try to get a Bat Colony in there, but Bat Colony wasn't actually that good. So if we're talking about baseline power level also, right? Bat Colony just didn't meet the baseline entry for power level into the format.
Yeah, I agree.
All right, moving on to Brood Rage Mycoid. This is 3 and a black for a 4/3, and at the beginning of your end step, if you descended this turn, you make a 1/1 token that can't block. I believe it's a fungus token.
Yes, it is. There were a handful of cards of our 20 that I had a difficult time adjusting. This is one of them, because I couldn't quite figure out how to make this not like there were tweaks that I was making. I was like, I don't need this to be like a top common. So how do I because I was thinking about tweaks to it that were just going to make it too powerful. And I was like, this doesn't need to be too powerful. It just needs to be kind of good. So, but I think I landed on maybe one that's too powerful. So I decided, I decided to make it a 3/3. So it's a 4-mana 3/3. But when you descend, you make a bat, not a fungus.
Ooh, that's that's borderline. I don't know if that's too powerful. That might be fine.
It might be fine, but that's where I landed. What did you do?
I again, it's a little avant-garde. Maybe my changes are more avant-garde. I made it 1 and a black
Whoa.
for a 1/3
One
with
of
the
black,
same
one
ability.
three. Oh, I actually really like that.
Yeah, because I wanted more
It's a
cheap
it's
defense.
yeah,
Yeah,
it's a
I wanted to give it reach, and I thought that was a little too busted.
also it seems out of the color pie a little bit.
No, black, green, 4/4, flying vigilance, right?
That's right. That's right. Sorry, I forgot about that. Yeah, I like that. 2-mana 1/3 gives black a little more defensive speed and potentially lets you
It
like start the descent train early, lets you load up on these.
Yeah, it gives the white black sacrifice deck a little more
Yeah.
fodder potentially, like helps that deck turn on a little bit more.
Ooh. All right. That's it. I think you win that one for sure. All right. Next up is Canonized in Blood. This card was terrible. This was one that we sort of I had to talk you off the ledge a little bit in preview season about. So this is one of the black enchantment. At the beginning of your end step, if you descended this turn, you get to put a +1/+1 counter on a creature, and you can pay, what is it, 5 black black or 6 and a black to sacrifice it and make a 4/3 token with flying.
So, if we're just talking about power level, right?
Yeah.
Like, so we saw Bat Colony, we saw Canonized in Blood, like they're making you jump through hoops for +1/+1 counters. Blue just gets it for free with
Yeah.
upside,
Yeah.
like with map tokens, like no effort needed and high synergy. Like that's there's such a power level discrepancy there.
So this is one of my more avant-garde changes. So I'll go first. I said
Okay.
if you descended this turn, you lose a life and you draw a card. And instead of it making a 4/3 flyer, it makes a 4/3 lifelink. So you're gonna once you get to that mana, you get a thing that's gonna hopefully get you some of that life back that you got. And
Okay, I like
I
it.
don't even think this would have been a good card. Like,
Right.
but I think this could have at least been. It could have been something to like try and go after, try and make work. Whereas just like the way Canonized in Blood was, you just never wanted to touch it.
Yes. My change here was again trying to power up some of the tokens decks and trying to descend a little bit more to incentivize you. So I changed it to if you descended, you make a 1/1 vampire token with lifelink, and then also changing the rules of descend to where tokens would trigger descend. Like then that would turn this
You
into
can't do that though. You don't want to do that.
why
That's
not?
because you don't want an infinite. You don't want to be able to descend every turn with just a token. Like
I
then
do.
I don't think you do.
You really don't?
I really don't. I mean, it's your game. You can do whatever you want. But I think that descend not including tokens is correct. I just also think it's incredibly clunky and you have to design the mechanic differently.
That's
Oh,
fair.
like, yeah.
I also toyed around with this one pooping out bats, but
Yeah.
I couldn't quite dial that one in. It sounds like I didn't dial my other design in either.
All right, next up we have Mephitic Draft. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this one. So this is 1 and a black for an artifact. When Mephitic Draft enters the battlefield or is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, you draw a card and lose a life. Again, I don't think my change makes this card particularly good, but I did give it the ability to sacrifice itself. So I gave it 1 and a black, sacrifice Mephitic Draft.
Ooh, I like that. I also tacked on some upside. I think between both of us, we've got a very good card. I also added on that it mills a card on ETB and going to the graveyard.
Oh, again, you're trying to juice descend a little bit.
Yeah.
Oh, because then it by itself, like if it hits a permanent both times, it by
You
itself will
get
get
2.
you.
Yeah.
You'll get 2 plus itself.
Plus itself. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. I'm into that.
All right. Next up, we've got Basking Capybara. 1 and a green for a 1/3. This card fell from the previews.
Man.
Descend 4, it gets +3/+0 as long as there are 4 or more permanent cards in your graveyard.
I can go first if you want. Yeah.
Go
Okay.
for it.
So my change for this was I made it a 2/2. So 1 and a green 2/2. And I said when it ETBs, if you have descend 4, you draw a card. So rather than, because I feel like part of the thing about this card was, or the appeal for this card was, well, it's good early, good late, right? 2 mana 1/3 early, or 2 mana 1/3 early, 2 mana 4/3 late. But you just didn't really care about a 2 mana 4/3 late. And so I was like,
We also didn't care about a 2 mana 1/3 early.
correct. So I was like, well, let's make it a 2/2 early, which is at least a more serviceable body. And then later on, I didn't want to make it bigger. I just thought like, so to not punish you for drawing your 2 mana 2/2 later in the game, it cantrips for you.
I went with a different approach. I just tried to make it relevant early. Mine's a little cleaner. I just added reach to it.
A little cleaner than my great design. Excuse you, sir. You just added reach to it?
Yeah, so then it can block all of the stupid blue flyers.
It's actually pretty good because green didn't
And
get a
then-
small reach
Right.
creature.
You were just dying in the early game constantly, and then this is good. And if they have a trick to push through, fine. It fuels Descend. But the reason you couldn't play this as a defensive creature was because it could never block the things that it needed to be able to block. So then it either slows the game down, or they use a trick to push it through and it goes to your graveyard and helps fuel Descend, or late in the game it's a 4/3 reach, which you're also pretty happy with.
Yeah. Next up, I don't even know if this card was worth changing, but we put it on the list just because it was such another clunker in a color that I think could have used having some non-clunkers early in the curve. This is Malamet Brawler. It's 1 green for a 2/2. When it attacks, you can give another creature trample until end of turn.
I had a very, I thought, good solution, because this was like what I thought every time I saw this card in the draft. Why is this not a dinosaur? This just needed to be a dinosaur.
That doesn't
and then all of a sudden it's playable. Because then you can curve this into the 3/3, gain 3 life. You can give your big clunky dinosaurs trample. This is infinitely more playable if it's a dinosaur.
I went avant-garde, as we're saying this episode. I made this a 3/1, and I said when it deals combat damage to a player, create a map token.
Whoa, that is juiced.
But it's a 3/1, like, so maybe it'll hit, but like it's it creates a slight little mini game, gives green some aggression. I don't know.
I like it. Yeah. I like that card.
Cool.
It feels like uncommon power level almost, but I don't think it's out of control with what else is going on in the format.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, I'm into it. All right, next we've got Zoyoa Lava Tongue. This is black-red for the 2/2 Death Touch. At the beginning of your end step, if you descended this turn, each opponent may discard a card or sacrifice a permanent, and this deals 3 damage to each opponent who didn't.
Yeah, so the issue with red-black, I think, in the format was that, well, one, I think red-black, you looked at this card and you thought, oh, it's aggressive. But then we realized black can never play an aggressive role in the format. And so this is more of a grindy attrition card, but it's just too, like, the decision is too slow. The fact that your opponent gets to decide they're going to sack a thing, maybe it's going to help them with descend, whatever, like, it's just not good. So I just said, if you descended this turn, each opponent loses 2 life. That's it.
That's a clean solution. I changed it to sacrifice a non-land permanent so that people felt a non-land, non-token permanent, so that people felt the pinch a little bit more.
That's
they had to get rid of a real piece of cardboard or
lose 3. Okay, yeah. I was gonna say, do they still have the choice? Yeah, that makes sense.
But our brains are on a similar wavelength, I think, with it.
Yeah. Okay. Next up, we have Promising Vein. Shout out to my least favorite land of the year. This is the Cave. Taps for a colorless, and you can pay 1 tap, sack it to search your library for a basic land, put it into play tapped, then shuffle. I mean, again, I don't know if my solution makes this playable, but I did say that this could search for a cave.
Oh, yeah, that's nice. I did even more than that. I kind of thought it already did that for some reason, but yeah, search for a cave would be great. But I just want it to be Evolving Wilds. Like, I just don't want to have to pay the 1. I think if it were a cave that were Evolving Wilds, they could just tap to search up a basic. That's enough.
That's insane.
Why is that insane?
That's just so put. So you're just juicing Evolve. You're just saying Evolving Wilds and Terramorphic Expanse, you're done. You guys are pushed out. Now we have a card that is just a land that taps for colorless or tap sack.
No.
Oh.
I don't want it to be able to tap for colorless.
Okay,
I want it to be a cave that is an Evolving Wilds.
Oh, that's clean. Yeah, so we have the same idea.
Yeah, similar.
Okay, cool. I like that.
No, I don't want Evolving Wilds to tap for a colorless. Like, I did not. That was on me. I did not do a very good job articulating that. That was on me.
Wow.
All right, moving on to Huatley's Final Strike. This is 2 and a green for an instant. Target creature you control gets +1/+0 until end of turn. Deals damage equal to its power to target creature an opponent controls.
I'm juicing it, baby.
Juicing it.
Clear shot at common. I want +1/+1 and
Whoa.
bite. That's what I want.
+1/+1. I kind of like that solution better. I made it cost 1 and a green.
Yeah. I wonder which. I mean, those, like, that's what we sort of learned from these previous alchemized sets, is that it's just a couple tiny little knobs that you turn. So I don't know if it's 1 mana less or 1 toughness more or whatever, but I do feel like it doesn't take much to make Huatli's Final Strike really good. And it doesn't I don't feel like, again, like you said, I don't think Huatli's Final Strike, I don't think green having a good removal spell at common is so out of whack with what's happening with the rest of the format.
No, there's nothing blue on our list of things to buff.
That's true.
And
That's
a
true.
lot of descend, a lot of black, a lot of green, a lot of K. It was like things that were just mechanically, but it starts with mechanically. Like, yeah, these are some flat card designs, but there's such a hurdle from the disparity between mechanics to overcome, I think.
Yeah. The last one we have on our list, and you could sort of think about this as a mechanic, but it was really just sort of like an archetype identity, which was black-white sacrifice. So we have Bartolome del Presidio, which is a black-white for a 2/1, and you can sacrifice an artifact or a creature to put a ++1 counter on it. I think when sacrifice stuff doesn't come with its own fodder, it's really hard. We saw this with, Skullport Merchant was very strong and wasn't uncommon. But he like sacked to draw cards too. I don't think it's crazy for Bartolome to come in with just a little something something. And I know there are no blood tokens in the format otherwise, but blood has a little bit of descend synergy in terms of letting you discard. It's got some vampire juice there. So I said, Bartolome, you're a 1/2 now, not a 2/1, and you enter the battlefield with a blood token.
I like it. That's very avant-garde, bringing in the blood mechanic.
Yeah.
Mine was, I just wanted it to be a little different. I wanted black-white to be more of a deck. And I think what I did to Bartolome would just, in and of itself, turn black-white into a very competitive deck with the blue decks. I made it a 1/2 with Ward 2. So it was a little harder to kill. Almost wanted to give it Ward 3, and then to have sacrifice another creature artifact to drain 1, gain 1.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that's great. What if it also, like, because we also felt like the whole sacrifice thing was missing a when you sacrifice. So what if Bartolome, I mean, that's just Cruel Celebrant, I guess. Like, I was just like, what if Bartolome, rather than it being able to sacrifice, if it just said when you sacrifice,
Is a blood artist.
it's a blood artist, but only for your stuff. Yeah.
But then there's no cards that let you sack a bunch of things in one turn to dome them out, right?
I don't know if that's good. Like, I don't know if that's good for limited, Like, I don't know if being able to just machine gun your opponent for 6 or whatever is good.
That's fair.
But yeah, it's possible. All right, so those are our buffs. Now we've got the naughty list, the cards that need to be reined in. First up, we've got Oltec Cloud Guard. And it's interesting. I feel very confident that I know what all of these cards do. The other ones I was like, what's Canonized in Blood do? Yeah, okay. So Oltec Cloud Guard, 3 and a white for a 3/2 flyer. When it ETBs, you get a 1/1. I did small tweaks for a lot of these. And my tweak was just make it a 3/1 instead of a 3/2.
Ooh, I still think it's pretty busted as a 3/1 flyer.
It's still so I didn't want to make it. Well, I'm curious. What's your change?
My change is 3 white for a 3/3 flyer plus a 1/1.
Isn't that just bad now? Like, what I wanted to do is I was like, I don't know if it's bad that this is white's best common or second best white common or whatever. Like that is is that worse than Basilica Shepherd from 1? I know it's hard to like compare cards across different sets, but Basilica Shepherd was 3 white for a 3/3 flyer that made 2 mites, so they couldn't block.
I think the fact that the 1/1 can block is
a flyer
big deal. Yeah,
or
the 1/1's not a flyer; it's just an artifact, right?
Oof. I like my change better.
As you should. It's your change.
All right, Clay Fried Bricks. What's going on there?
This is 1 and a white for an artifact. When ETBs, search your library for a basic plains card, reveal it, put it in your hand, then shuffle. You gain 2 life, and you can craft with artifact for 5 white. When you do, it turns into Cosmium Kiln. And when that ETBs, you make 2 1/1 colorless gnome artifact creature tokens, and creatures you control get +1/+1.
Yeah, so I will confess, a handful of these, 3 maybe on this list, 4 I would say maybe on this list, I didn't really feel strongly about changing, and this is one of them. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts on why this card. I mean, maybe we've already talked about it with craft and win the early game, late game, or whatever. What's your change to the old clay fried bricks?
Well, first of all, I think this card existing is just egregious. Like it lets white decks play well in the early game and also win the late game, which is just not remotely close to fair. When your opponent gets off to a good start and also has a clay fried bricks on the battlefield, like you just feel hopeless,
Yeah,
which is not a great feeling. Like, even if you manage to kind of dig in, as soon as they hit that 7th mana, like it's not great when your aggro deck, you're rooting for your opponent's aggressive deck to
to miss
not draw
land
their
drops.
7th land drop.
Yeah,
Yes, that's not a fair feeling.
that's
Like,
fair. That's
and
true.
this also helps you get to that threshold by finding a land. Like, I think this card would be fine if it. There's many changes. The one I came up with was a 2 and a white initial cost instead of a 1 and a white initial cost to make it a
Ooh,
little here up front, and to craft with 2 artifacts instead of 1.
that
And
was.
I still think that's a very good Magic card.
I only did the craft with 2 artifacts as my change. I thought it was also slightly flavorful with those 2 artifacts
Right.
turning into the 2/1/1s.
Yeah, look at that. Look at us. Couple designers here.
Wizards, hello. But I get the two. Does 2 and a white make it too bad? Then I think it
No,
might.
because it gets a land. You're playing like 3 mana,
You're,
1/1, search up a land or whatever.
but it's not
Like,
a 1/1.
but it gains you 2 life. It's a bit of a speed bump, and it's so much better in the late game.
Yeah, yeah.
It is not
So you
too
would.
bad.
So your nerf would just be cut it from the set.
Oh, if I could, for sure.
Yeah.
Yes, for sure, for sure.
I'm curious about then this next one too, Zoetic
God,
Glyph. So
Zoetic.
and there was I wish I would pulled it up, but I think there was some Twitter discourse about the design of this card and that it had been perhaps less good and then they made it too good or whatever. So this is the 2 and a blue enchantment. You enchant an artifact, make it a 5/4, and when Zoetic Glyph leaves the battlefield, you discover 3. And that part I think is 3 mana, 5/4, pretty big, but I don't think that's that egregious. I think the big knock against this is that it's not just when enchanted creature dies.
Right.
Like
Yes.
it being the fact that once this sticks, you have no hope of them not getting Discover 3. It's pretty bad.
It's pretty bad. So is that your change?
That's my change, yeah. Is that when it dies, Discover 3. I mean, you could nerf it to a 4/3 and it would still be good, but I'm not sure that you need my feeling is not that you have to flatten the power level of all of these things. My feeling is not that there can't be a mythic uncommon in blue, and if that's Zoetic Glyph, so be it, whatever. But I do think this can't both excel on the axis of a head-on rate and then really tough to answer without getting savaged value-wise, you know?
Yes. Mine is a less elegant solution. I thought about the solution you proposed, but then I still thought it was a little too good. I changed it to 3 and a blue, enchanted artifact as a 4/4, and when the creature dies, draw a card.
Yeah, that just feels like a common to me. That's like Mightstone's animation, kind of.
Yeah, I wanted it to be more like that, but
That's just so much worse.
yeah, I think I'd be fine with turning the thing into a 4/3, and when it dies, discover 3.
Yeah.
I think I would be fine with that change.
And that would still be very good.
Would still be very good. Yeah,
Yeah.
because of the discover portion of it, right?
Yeah.
Discover is either very good or not so good.
Well, but the fact that this is a 3 mana thing that then discovers 3, that's just also busted.
Yeah.
You're potentially you're getting something valuable, and then when it goes away, you're getting something that's perhaps equally as valuable in terms of your investment of mana.
Yeah, it's a built-in aggressive 2-for-1.
Yeah. Next up is the other mythic blue uncommon Spyglass Siren. Single blue 1/1 flyer. When it ETBs, you get a map token. We sort of had this and Waterwind Scout in conversation. I requested if we were going to do this one, because I think I have a better solution for this one, which is I decided to make it an 0/1 instead of a 1/1.
That's the same thing I had for Waterwind Scout. I was going to make Spyglass Siren an 0/1, and I was going to make Waterwind Scout a 1/2.
Yeah. I want Spyglass Siren being an 0/1 feels better to me than Scout being a 1/2 feel is that just too bad? Maybe not. Maybe it's just good.
Then it's an appropriately valued card where you're kind of hoping to hit the land. That's what I want. If Explorer is on an evasive creature, I would like to be incentivized to hit a land.
Yeah.
I would want to be rooting for, like, okay with either outcome rather than it feel like feast or famine, whether I hit a +1/+1 counter or a land.
All right, another evasive one drop is up next. What's going on there?
We've got Ruin Lurker Bat. This is single white for a 1/1 with flying and lifelink. At the beginning of your end step, if you descended this turn, scry 1.
Another card, I'm going to be honest. I think this is fine.
Oof.
I think it's fine.
I took away lifelink.
I said it's a 1/1 flyer. If you descended this turn, it gains lifelink until end of turn. Like it has lifelink as long as you've descended this turn.
So you would need to descend early in the turn
Yeah.
to be able to attack with it with lifelink?
So
But
not often.
isn't descended always at the end of your turn?
Well, that's what if you get a thing, but you could definitely be like, yeah, there are cards where that's happened before where it's like,
when you descend, this gains lifelink.
Sure, how about that? Yeah, maybe that's a cleaner. Like whatever. I let R&D take care of the nitty gritty there.
Yeah, both of those are significantly worse cards than what it is.
Is Ruin Lurker Bat that egregious? I don't think it is.
It's not, except for, like, and this goes back to power level or things you're incentivized to do. It just so directly, easily slots in as a busted card into what decks are already incentivizing you to do. And not for,
Evasive
like, it's not cool because it has the descend text. It's cool because it's a 1/1 flying lifelink that you can dump counters onto and then race. Like, that's not what the card is trying to do, I don't think. Like, so to me, that's a design fail. Like, this is so easily abused that way.
That, like, the descend part of this doesn't matter. It's just the fact that it's a 1/1 flying lifelink.
Yes, that's what it is. Yeah. And I don't think that's particularly interesting. And I think it's largely unhealthy for the format for what white decks are already trying to do.
I think I agree with that. Yeah. Next up, we have Captain Storm Cosmia Raider. This is the signpost blue-red 2/2. Whenever an artifact enters the battlefield under your control, you can put a +1/+1 counter on target pirate you control.
Yeah, I changed this one to be gets +1/+1 until end of turn instead of a +1/+1 counter.
And I said this ability triggers only once each turn.
Yeah, those were the two I was flip-flopping back and forth between.
Yeah. Next up, as you'll see, we have a lot of one drops on, and we probably could have just done a whole thing about the one drops. And I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing that the format is so wrapped up in a lot of these 1 mana plays, but I think perhaps just tweaking them a little bit is something that could have improved the set. So we have Goblin Tomb Raider. It's 1 red mana for a 1/2. As long as you have an artifact in play, it has +1/+0 and haste.
Yeah, this is one that I don't actually mind existing the way it is. If I had to change it, I think I would have it get +1/+0 and menace instead of +1/+0 and haste.
Oh, that's pretty good. Yeah, I don't mind this. This feels sort of akin to Goblin Ruin Blaster from Brothers War, where you kind of had to build around it common, right? Like you got one of these. Once you had like 2 of these, you were actively looking for as many of these as possible and as many cheap artifacts as possible as well. And I think having that as a deck at common is good. It just so happened that every color kind of had the ability to do something like that at common. I probably nerfed it too far, but I said basically just when it ETBs, if you have an artifact, it gets +1/+0 and haste until end of turn. So 1 turn, like if you played on,
that's a huge nerf, right?
Yeah, so it's just a bad card then.
But I think also once you nerf Captain Storm, I think Goblin Tomb Raider is like totally fine, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's like how explosive some of those starts could be with a Captain Storm.
Yeah, I buy that.
All right, next up we've got the little guy that could, the Pogwork champion himself. We've got blue for a 1/2 with flash, and when it ETBs, target creature an opponent controls gets -2/-0 until end of turn.
I don't mind this card that much, to be honest.
It's it's pretty annoying in that it's so free. Like, this is where, like, if we talk about power level, like, and once you start to, okay, so there's power level disparity between the blue cards and some of the other cards, right? Like, the blue cards are just intrinsically more powerful than a lot of the other commons of other colors. And then once you start to stack, like, Water Wind Scout plus Spyglass Siren, plus, all of a sudden, like, one of the ways your opponent could maybe play defense is blocking, and then throw in this card that's already synergistic that says your opponent can't engage with you in combat without getting horrifically wrecked efficiently. Like, it just starts to be oppressive a little bit. Like, so I agree, Cogwork Wrestler is a fine Magic card, but once you add its efficiency up to all of the other efficiencies, like it does really start to get out of hand. Like there's a bit of a like point of no return or a tipping point or something where like it's just hard for the other colors to compete, I think.
Yeah, and I think my solution was to make it not an artifact. Just remove that one piece of synergistic property from it. And I think it's still fine. It's still playable. We've seen those cards before, but I just think it being an artifact pushes it over the top a little bit.
I made it cost 1 and a blue. I like the fact that it's an artifact. I like the fact that it's synergistic and a body and all those other things. I just think, and maybe you don't even need to change it if you nerf some other things. Like
Sure.
if you know, all of a sudden, if Waterwind Scout is a 1/2 and the most power it can have is a 2/3 flyer, then maybe Cogwork Wrestler's fine, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Next, we have Caparakti Sunborn. This is 2 red white for a 4/4. And when it attacks, you can tap 2 other artifact or creatures you control, or tap 2 untapped artifact or creatures you control. And if you do, you discover 3.
So I changed this to not Discover because I am not a Discover fan.
Mm-hmm.
I said, but I also wanted it to stay aggressive, but not be quite so snowbally. That was one of the things I didn't like about this card was that it could just totally
If this
snowball out of
ever
hand.
got to attack a second time, like you just, if you couldn't answer this the time it attacked, you were losing that game.
You were losing that game. But also, too, because sometimes it could attack and your opponents could have double blocks, and then the Discoverer could make it to where they had a bad double block, like you hit a removal spell or you hit a combat trick.
That's just
Or
like, yeah, but you're all wrapped up in the variants of Discover, which I think you need to get off that
I
train.
hate it so much. So I changed this to when it attacks, tap 2 untapped creatures or artifacts to deal 3 damage to the opponent. And
Ooh.
maybe it needs to be 2 instead of 3, but to where like you could reasonably expect to, in good faith, engage with this in combat. And maybe 2 is the answer instead of 3. I was trying to decide between the 2 numbers.
Yeah, 3 seems like whew, that's 7 coming at you, 3
7
unblockable.
coming at you, but then
That's
you could chump 4 of it if you needed to. But more than anything, you're not falling behind on board. Like
yeah.
3 damage is way less
I mean,
oppressive than discovering, right?
yeah.
Like way less.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. I like that change. Yeah, this was the true one I had no change for. I just couldn't come up with it. Cuz again, didn't think this card was like super egregious, but as we talked about, it could snowball pretty hard. Last card on this list is Master's Guide Mural. What's going on here?
So this is 3 white blue for an artifact. When it ETBs, you make a 4/4 white and blue golem artifact creature token, and you can craft with artifact for 4 white, white, and a blue to get Master's Manufactory. Tap to make a 4/4, and you can activate that only if this or another artifact enter the battlefield under your control this turn.
Just a small tweak. I tacked on an additional blue mana to its craft cost. So
Ooh.
just like, I don't mind that it gets a win con in the late game like this that even does take a little bit of work. But I do think then let's make you get really to that late game. Let's get you to 8 mana instead. And let's make this truly not splashable at all. It's white, white, blue, blue, 4 to craft.
I had it make 3/3s instead of make 4/4s.
But still a 5, so a 5 mana 3/3.
5 mana 3/3, and then maybe you could shift its craft cost down to 6 or something. But I just think 3/3s are so much less.
I also think isn't that what golems are usually? Like precursor golem or the golems from like Blade Splicer.
Yeah.
Keeps it in the family. I love these exercises. I love a separate list. What's the sort of like takeaway, or this was a little bit of a fun exploration, but is there any sort of like strategic implications we can leave our listeners with, or just thoughts about card evaluation or power evaluation that we can send them home with?
I think the River Herald Scout discussion is the most interesting one, because if you're evaluating River Herald Scout using any like limited resources evaluation metric, it gets a great grade. Like if you put it on quadrant theory, it's good when you're developing, it's good when you're ahead, it's good. It's not great when you're behind, it's fine when you're at parity, it's getting a land off the top of your deck. Like it's a good Magic card that somehow is bad because of how warped things got in the context of the format with evasive threats and aggression and low curves. And then also like the explore mechanic as a blue green deck not quite working out. Like maybe if the blue green deck is better, then all of a sudden River Herald Scout is a card that you're interested in. But like that card falling flat to me is indicative of the things I don't like about the format. Like I want that to be a good Magic card in the formats I'm playing.
Yeah. You know, as I don't quite know where I'm about to go with this, but hopefully I'll get to a point somewhere along the way. But, you know, there's so many, going back to the beginning of the episode, there's so many great things to be doing in Magic Online right now with Cube, with Kaladesh Remastered, Rivals of Ixalan coming back, Con still on, LCI still on if you want it. Like, there's tons of Magic to be played. And if you're newer to the game, or even if you're not, if you just like didn't get a lot of reps in with something, you know, we're seeing a lot of deck techs, draft log reviews from people who are, you know, they've listened to the 50 takes and they want to dip their toe in a new format. And they're coming up short with cards, with decks, with game plans. They're not quite hitting the mark. And I think you really have to go back to like what we talk about with sealed, what we talk about with, you know, just intrinsic power level. Cards doing their things on their own is just so important. And like this doesn't quite line up with the River Herald Scout discussion, because that, you know, you put that in the context of someone coming back to this set and being like, oh, this card looks great. And you're like, oh, actually, no, it's not great. Yes, you're right, but it's not great here. Like, it's a little tough. Like, there are some nuances from set to set, but I think just hammering home people like trusting card evaluation in the sense of like, what is the raw rate for a thing? What's the vanilla test? What am I getting for it? Rather than, I think people want to dive in and be like, oh, I got all these energy payoffs for Kaladesh. That's so cool. Or I got all these ways to make energy. And I'm like, where are you? Yeah, energy is a great resource. What are you doing with that? It can't just be to give your Riparian Tiger +2/+2 for a turn. Like, you got to be doing something with your 9 energy at the end of the game. Otherwise, your deck is just fizzling pretty hard.
Right. Well, that just goes into learning formats. I mean, that's like a whole, not like it's
Yeah.
hard to learn a format in the context of the format and the ins and the outs and which cards matter. And so much of evaluating power is baked into which colors are good. Like in this instance, like almost every, you see that in the 17 lands data, right? Like almost every blue card probably gets a bump, like just because blue's great in their win rate. Like this rising tide lifts all boats kind of thing. Like that's certainly there going on. But then also there's just like a sense of in this format, what feels good to me, right? Like I know River Herald Scout is a good card, but I don't feel great when I cast River Herald Scout in the format. You know, when my
Yeah.
opponent goes 1/1 flyer and then a turn 3 flyer, and I think, oh man, this card doesn't feel great. My opponent's cards look real good. Like just
Well,
paying attention to how cards feel while you're playing the games is another great way to evaluate power level.
right. Well, and it's not only the evasive threats. One of the other reasons River Herald Scout fails is that, like, you know, the Dino decks get red 2-mana 3/3s that are attacking, you know, or you know, uncommon 2-mana 3/2s, or you know, just they get juiced power on the ground. Where that once you're left with this, either it's a 2-mana 1/2 that drew you a land, don't care about that. 2-mana 2/3 that didn't draw you anything, that can't tussle either, right? Like, so it's not just the evasion; it's just sort of the pushed power level of everything.
Well, and one of the things we didn't touch on hardly at all was the Dinos deck, and I think they kind of nailed it with the Dinos deck, except the blue white stuff is a little too good. Like I think if that were reined in a little bit, like the Dinos deck would be right at home, and it still is competing as people are, you know, going after the Jeskai colors a little bit more.
It's just hard for like big dumb stompy stuff to be able to compete with double spelling tempo evasive threats, right? Like that's usually the case in limited. Like it's been a while since, I mean, I guess for actually LB1, red green was the best deck, but like it's rare that red green beats is the best deck in limited.
Right? Yeah, for sure. All right, that was a lot. I don't know how helpful it was for listeners, but it sure was fun for me.
Yeah, that was fun. You know, we kicking off the new year. We're sort of in a lull. We'll be back next week with 50 takes and
Wait, did I just see when you stretched a that's how you do it pullover After you canceled the Survivor podcast on me?
That's true. Yeah.
Wow. Just the savage rub-ins.
Yeah,
I
this
missed
is
that podcast
I
already, and the next season of Survivor is not even out yet.
sorry, Ben. Sorry for you. Sorry for you. I'll be taking your podcast.
And on that note, for the 100 people that get that reference, great place to wrap us up. Thank you, as always, to Salty Pretzels for our intro and outro music. Make sure you give it a listen.
Thank you so much to CoolStuffInc.com for sponsoring this podcast. If you're heading over there, and we really encourage you to head on over there for any and all purchases, please use checkout code LOL when you do to let them know we sent you over there, and more importantly, to get 5% off anything you purchase. You can find all of our content on our website at lordsoflimited.com. Links to our merch, courtesy of TeePublic, link to our episode backlogs, links to our Twitch channels, our YouTube channel, which is popping off, of course, and links to our tier lists, all that good stuff over at lordsoflimited.com.
If you've got any feedback about the show or any questions, shoot us an email at lordsoflimited@gmail.com.
Thank you so much for listening, and we'll catch you next week for another episode of Lords of Limited.
Thanks, everybody. See you later.